Today's conversation is about the ESG movement, one that we have seen, becoming more prominent in Pakistan's startup ecosystem as well as the startup ecosystem in the world. So today we're going to be asking Sajjeed to tell us a bit more about this. What role does it play in our ecosystem? What are the benefits it may offer different people, and also what are the challenges that come across with it? So Sajjeed, my first question to you is, for those people who are unaware of what ESG really means, what is it and what role does it play in Pakistan's startup ecosystem?
Thank you, Michelle. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And these are the factors which are the non-financial factors, which are now investor, regulator, and even the customer. They want to see how the organization, company is handling those and how they are adding value. For example, if we are looking at the natural capital, so what organization is doing to make sure that the natural capital like land, biodiversity, carbon emission, these things are not destroying the current environment, and we are going to leave the earth better than the way we got it, or at least bare minimum for the generation to come to really leverage those natural resources which we got historically. Similarly, the social refer to the overall community well-being, the employees' well-being, the human rights compliances, and the governance is all around that. What are the local practices in terms of anti-bribery? Let's say that's one of a key area. How the organization has designed its processes to curb the corruption within the value chain, if it's ever exists, and how they are managing the organization, how the board is designed, their diversity in terms of the gender, their diversity in terms of the different social background. So that's bring the right kind of perspective. And how all these factors and their impacts are being disclosed to investor, customer, and regulator going forward voluntarily or through the regulation if it become mandatory.
Okay, so it's a very holistic concept, which really, answers all the different problems that a startup should be keeping in mind. So I want to ask you on a personal level, what prompted you to take this path on in your professional life?
I think there are a couple of drivers. Like if you look at, is there a business case? Let's go with the fundamental one. The economics is the fundamental thing which drives everything. So if the customer is demanding that they will only buy from the organizations where the practices are sustainable, they are supporting the circular economy. So that's mean the businesses have to make that change the way they are running business today. Similarly, if we are looking at the biodiversity or water usage or carbon emission as a one of a challenge, what organization is doing about it? And if they are not doing about anything about it, so there could be implication in terms of fine, there could be implication of losing the market, like EU Sustainable Textile Initiative is a threat to a lot of markets or countries where the textile is not being produced through a sustainable practices. Similarly, the governance, when we look at that and we are trying to really handle the corruption well, or we are trying to bring the perspective, a different perspective to the governance, how the organization should be managed in perpetuity and what we are doing for succession planning. I think all these things are quite exciting. It has got an economic value. It has got a business case. So this is something which is very close to my heart, how we can support the businesses to really get on that transition and get on that journey. And I think ESG is a very exciting journey, particularly when we look at the startup ecosystem. When they are going for their next round of investment, there are a lot of investor or a green capital available, provided they start complying at least bare minimum, or what we call the minimum viable compliance with the ESG and the sustainable practices. And that will attract different kind of investor, and that will ensure a different kind of valuation as well.
So, Sajjeed, do you, in your experience, when you've seen different startups or different organizations kind of adopt this now, do they require a lot of training in this field? Like, how can they actually start this journey? Do they need to hire sustainability specialists? Do they need people who are experts in these fields, or can they just, start as it is?
Okay, I think there's a certain way to look at that one. ESG is a new framework, but it's not a new concept. Even historically, if you go even before Christ, there was a concept of sustainability, how we are handling the deforestation and how it's impacting the urbanization or movement of the citizen from one place to other, and how it impacts the economy or the well-being of those people who are bound to migrate just because of that deforestation at that stage. And going back to 1960s, there are a lot of initiatives which were talking about more responsible investments. Like when you are investing in the organizations, you have to really see how the investee is treating different aspect of environment. Environment was definitely one of a key. And then over the period, people have recognized that it's a long-term view which matter. If they have got a happy employee, the productivity will be higher and the valuation will be higher and the customer will be happy at the same time. Similarly, if they are taking care of the community where they are operating, they will have more public support for their product or initiatives. Similarly, if they are taking care of environment, so they can avoid the fines, which are practically one of a risk they have to look at that. So if we look at the fundamentals, it's very simple. It's based on the principles that how we should be doing right things, and that's it. So it's not something different. ESG, when we come to the framework side of it, what the ESG is referring to, ESG is referring to starting identifying and measuring your business impact and the impact of the value chain which you are running or managing on the different, or at least three factors, from an environment perspective, from a social and a governance perspective. From an implementation perspective, if you look at the startup, what they have to start doing, they just have to start asking very fundamental questions to themselves. That's the first thing which the board has to do. How we are operating in the environment, does our operation impacting anything on environment? How we are handling the social issue, how our employees are happy, are they well engaged there? Do they have any issues? Do we have enough diversity on the board? Do we have any process to really identify and handle any corrupt practices within our own organization and within the value chain? If we have, what we're going to do about it? So I think these are the fundamental questions, and these questions does not require expertise there. These questions just require a person start putting a weight on those non-financial factors which create a long-term value. So I wouldn't say that they have to start with the sustainable specialist. They have to start by asking the question. The second phase is how you are going to measure it. So if we identify, we don't know how much carbon footprint we are generating by using this electricity. There are very simple tools which are available. So there is a lot of self-service toolkits which are available to identify and measure those specific factors within the businesses. And I think that's where the second part. First, you ask the question, and then you go for the self-service toolkits and the measures. And that's where the third stage is that where you need a specialist. Yep, we have got a carbon footprint. Is it the right quantity of the carbon footprint for our industry? So the benchmarking and the data, that's where you will start using a specialist there. And normally the businesses take ESG as a very complicated subject. It's not. And we are helping a lot of businesses to simplify that and make sure they understand the fundamental and start with the minimum viable compliance rather than looking at a long-term project management. We suggest that go for a 10 days, 20 days sprints and look for the risks and opportunity ESG can provide. And then make your decision and pilot something in one area and then scale in the next stage. Rather than, and it's a more a design thinking process which they might need to implement rather than taking a 4-year, 5-year or 10-year project that we are transitioning from current state to a ESG compliance stage. They can design it in a small sprints in a very simple way, and starting with the measuring what they are doing and disclosing it, and then trying to identify what they can do about it.
Thank you for that very detailed answer. My next question to you is that what are some of the challenges that a business or organization or startup might face when they are trying to adopt and implement this ESG? So, what are those challenges that they should be wary of, and also how can they kind of solve those challenges?
I think it starts with the behavior, because it's not going to change the operation. It's going to the way we manage the operation. So it's a change management. Nobody likes change. Let's say if we are saying that it's a daylight saving, which we should prefer because that help us to reduce the carbon footprint. That's when people should be at office somewhere like 8:30, 9 o'clock. It's a change in behavior. And then they should not be using the light. The building should be designed in a way where they have got enough sunlight or a daylight available. So again, are we designing the buildings with that particular thing in mind, that we are going to use the daylight? So I think the change management and the behaviors, I think that's the first challenge you encounter. But these are such a thing which, when you will ask somebody, can you contribute to reduce the corruption? Everybody would say yes. Are you willing to contribute towards preserving the natural capital or preserving the environment? Everybody would say yes. Do you want us to be more work in a more productive, fun place where the people are valued, their opinions are valued, there's no discrimination? The people will say yes. So conceptually, there's not a challenge, but changing our habits and behavior over the period, I think that's where it starts. And then second challenge, which is a practical challenge, is to capturing information and data to measure. That's because most of the systems, and it's not a financial data, it's not a recorded data. So sometimes it's become difficult to track the progress and measure that, what you are doing and how it's impacting the different measures, whether it's environment or it's social or it's a governance side. So data could be a one challenge, but the biggest challenge is the mindset, behaviors, and the habit which we need to change. Uh, and everybody will find it worth, and they will figure out a way to really capture that information and disclose those accordingly.
And this brings to my mind that most businesses and organizations are very bent on profit maximization, and that's the first job of a business is, be it a small business or a large business, is to maximize profit, to make as much revenue as they can. So in your experience, do you think that including this framework is kind of requires you to put that to the side for a bit and kind of think about other factors which are equally as important, even though they might be non-financial? And, as a culture, we don't give as much importance to the non-financial factors as we do to financial ones. So do you think that in itself is also a cultural problem that we might be facing?
I wouldn't say it's a cultural problem, it's an economic problem. So the profit is an important element. If the business is not sustainable and they are not generating enough cash flow, if we are talking startups, so profit is not the first priority, it's the user and the cash flow is the first. But if we are looking at a more established business, conventional business, profitability is the one. So can we have a compliance metrics there where the cost of compliance is higher than the benefit of the compliance? I would say it's an economic problem, and that's not sustainable. Nobody will accept that. That's why when we talk about the approach towards ESG and the transition towards ESG, I normally talk about the minimum viable compliance. It has to be viable, the first thing. And that viability should help business to land to the new market, new type of customer base, improve the price. So it help improve profitability in a longer run, but that's required two things. The minimum viable compliance you have to do, and that's not expensive. That's normally the cost is significantly, if we are talking about a small business or startup, it's just the way to think and the way you operate. It does not require you to invest specifically in the certain area. For example, if you are a last mile delivery organization and you just have to plan your delivery well, that how much fuel you can consume or reduce, and you can talk to your customer that rather than doing everything in a 30 minutes, we can go in a 2 hours, right? And that will help us to consolidate the delivery and go in a one trip and deliver to multiple customers. That will reduce the cost for the organization, that will reduce the carbon footprint, but then the customer has to understand. So the first thing, the organization has to think that way. Number two, they have to communicate and engage with the customer why they are doing it, because customer will be very happy if they get the delivery in a 15 or 30 minutes. But if they understand that if it's 2 hours and that help better the organization and the environment, they are more than willing to support that. And they might at some stage they might come back and say, I don't want to get a delivery from a certain organization because their carbon footprint is too high and they are destroying the organization. I don't want to do business. So from a cost perspective, if you go with the different thought process and engage your customer and investor properly, that actually help to improve profit, that help to improve loyalty of that, and that help to improve valuation. So I wouldn't say there is an additional cost. So the focus has to be the triple bottom line. If we talk about the focus has to be more sustainable practice, but the most important thing, how you think and how you communicate that to your customer and investor in today's world is the most important thing. So they understand your priority and they should appreciate and become more loyal to it.
Absolutely. And Sajjeed, my last question to you is going to be about what kind of support, implementing this ESG framework for different organizations. What kind of support do they require from other stakeholders, like be it the private sector or be it the policymakers in itself, so or the bureaucrats? What kind of support is needed?
I think the first thing when we go now, we are talking about a larger scale. So let's say we are talking about a multinational reviewing their supply chain and they want to go with the sustainable packaging, right? Just giving you one example. If they try to develop a sustainable packaging for their own products only, it will become very expensive. But if the entire industry work towards that and there are volumes available, I think that's where the magic happens. So the initiative is not at the organization level. Most of the time, the first part which business has to do is to mobilize and advocate within their own industry segment that what are the key practices, why they should change, what it will require, and how everybody is going to contribute. Then it will start happening at a scale. So that's when the business take the initiative. Second part comes into when the customer take the initiative. Like there are a lot of global brands, they said, we are not going to work with a supplier or a vendor whose practices are not sustainable, whether it's agriculture, whether we are talking about textile, whether we are talking about technology. Even there is a rating of the different programming languages, that how much energy that language consume, and there are languages which consume a less energy as compared to others. So I think going forward in the next 5 to 10 years, we will start seeing organization asking for development in a certain language just to be more compliant with the environment. And a lot of systems need to change. So I think these are the things where the first part is the advocacy and generating the awareness. And the industry can do that, academia can do that, ESG or sustainability activists can start generating that advocacy and awareness. So that's the first step. When we look at the government side, that what the government can do, in most of the countries, the governments are not going with the mandatory project implementation, but they are going through like the environment compliance or environment risk assessment is there for a while, even in the countries, developing countries like Pakistan. So we have, when we set up any industry, we do any business, there is a certain environment risk assessment which we have to review, file, and comply with, and there are penalties and the fines which are involved. Wastewater management is one of a key area, just to give you an example, which the industry has to see. And in the industrial zones, they have created the treatment plant. But if you ask any single business to create a treatment plant, it's a very expensive proposition. But the industrial zone can, because everybody contributes. So I think that's the industry has to work in a more collaborative way. The government has to support and subsidize in a certain area if they can. The government has to start adopting certain global standards in terms of disclosure. And it start with a voluntary one, but it should have a benefit. For example, the central bank can come up with a certain regulation. There is a 2% like interest rate discount if you are investing in a sustainable electricity, right? Right now, there is a cheap personal loan available to consumer if they try to put up a solar panel in their houses. So I think these are the incentives which government can and should provide. And again, it starts with the investment side. Any incentive coming from the investment side or coming from the sales or customer or new market side, that will drive adoption better than the government coming up with the checklist of compliances. And no government so far came up with that. They are still the principles and the framework they are suggesting. Again, going back to the very fundamental, like economics has to work for businesses.
So, on an ending note, do you have high hopes for Pakistan's organizations adopting the ESG framework in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think if we look at that, I think the adoption will start happening earlier. We are seeing a certain adoption which is happening in textile because the customer, again, EU Sustainable Textile Initiative is going to force them, if they want to continue their 5.66 billion euro worth of export to EU, then the textile have to start adopting those practices. And when the textile adopt that, then it's not the company which adopt that, their value chain has to adopt. For example, the textile consume a lot of starch. That's mean the company who's providing starch need to adopt that. And the starch is coming from corn. That's mean the corn supplier and the agriculture has to do that. So it's a one side of the industry which start, and then the entire value chain has to align with that. Otherwise, that will not be considered as a compliance if the textile organization itself is doing it, but the rest of the value chain is not. So that's a one thing which is going to drive, again, economics. Number two, the investors are putting a very high valuation for the organizations who are more compliant to ESG today. So that's mean the startups, and they are the early adopter and innovator either way. So if they start reviewing their practices and start incorporating the ESG consideration and start disclosing that to their investor, suddenly they will attract a different kind of investor, number one, and their valuation will start going up. So again, the overall, if you see, their spectrum of investor will be more broadened as compared to where they are today. So the conventional investor is either way is going to be there, but they will be able to attract the green capital, I would say, for that matter. But that again require a genuine implementation of that kind of practice, having that genuine, authentic thought process at a board level, and then having certain data to disclose that. The third area is coming from the regulation perspective. Now, recently, SEC US has it has issued a draft standard which will be implemented in a year, that the organizations have to disclose their climate action initiative as per COP26. And there are other countries who are also following up on the climate action of the countries and the businesses. That's mean if I need to do a business with any organization or a country where there's even a very simple regulatory requirement to disclose, we are not saying that there's anything going wrong. We are just talking about disclosing it. So that's mean any organization who has got a head office in US and they are working with a vendor, or they have a subsidiary or a supplier sitting in Pakistan, they have to consolidate that disclosure, that how much carbon footprint they have generated by themselves, that organization, and how much carbon footprint has been generated in their value chain. So that's mean if I'm working in Pakistan, even as a small business, they will ask me to provide my carbon footprint to them. So they can consolidate that in their financial statement or whatever the disclosures they need to do. So I think there are three key factors. The customers are driving it, investors are driving it, and there are certain regulator of the customer, which is driving customer to disclose that, which again create a value chain impact. So the adoption is not going to be the individual businesses. The adoption is going to be the entire value chain. So if I look at these three initiatives or these three drives which are happening around the world, and if Pakistan want to continue to stay integrated in a global trade and the global market, so I see that adoption happening quicker than what we believe today.
All right. Thank you so much, Lee, for taking out the time and enlightening all of us with this framework, including me. I think I've learned a lot of new things in this conversation. So thank you so much, and we really hope to continue these conversations and continue seeing the impact that this framework can have on our economy and just overall as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome back to another one of our sessions for the Let's Hatch It Out series. Today we are in conversation with Sajjeed Aslam. Sajjeed is a professional accountant and he carries over 25 years of management level experience in growth strategies, acquisition and mergers, IPO, corporate finance, governance, business development, and entrepreneurship. He is currently heading ACCA Pakistan, and he's also founding partner of investment advisory business, Investor Mentor for EdTech, AgriTech, PopTech, and e-commerce businesses. He has previously comes with a vast experience in the FMCG, telecom, and education sectors, in which he has served at high-level positions, including CEO, CFO, Chief Business Development Officer, and the function lead for many other multinationals as well. We are really happy to have Sajjeed with us, where we will today's conversation will be talking about the ESG framework and how that can help different businesses, startups, and organizations in Pakistan become more sustainable, and become a more inclusive part of our network. So, thank you so much, Sajjeed, for joining us.